We now begin with writing. Effective writing involves choosing the right words, framing the correct sentences, and constructing effective paragraphs. Words are the basic units, as they say in physics, that our writing will be made up of. Just like as they say, time is the unit that life is made up of. So that's for another day. But however, when you say words are the units of writing, we have to look at what are the parameters that our words should fall within to be deemed as effective or right words. In that sense, there are four parameters we look at. Number one, familiar. Number two, simple. Number three, concise. And number four, unbiased. Familiar words are everyday words with simple, sharp, and clear meanings in everybody's minds. That is because those words are very commonly used and they have been around in usage for a long time. Now, using the language that most of us do in our everyday conversation has a lot of benefits. Primarily that your communication has a basic purpose of conveying meaning. Conveying that meaning in as simple a word usage as possible is always a great idea. You would always want to avoid stiff, more difficult words that do not communicate so precisely or so quickly. Take an example. Let's say I need to write an email where I need to call everybody to discuss a product failure. So if I write that let us all can congregate and to contemplate and confabulate regarding this product failure, it may be very tough for some people to understand simply because words like congregate, confabulate or contemplate are not familiar words that are used commonly in the language. On the other hand, if I say let us all meet to think and talk about the product failure, it might be much more easy and it might ring a bell with most people who get that email. So although a common dictum of the language might say that familiarity breeds contempt, in terms of understanding of language, however, familiarity will definitely breed more understanding. With that, let us look at a few more examples of how familiar words can serve us better to convey the meaning to our audience. Suppose we say that the machine has a tendency to develop excessive and unpleasant audio symptoms when operated at elevated temperatures. Extremely lengthy sentence with very unclear meaning for the audience. We can write this better as this machine tends to get noisy when it runs hot. Simple and easily understandable. Another example, the decision was predicated on the assumption that an abundance of monetary funds was forthcoming. The decision was based on the belief that there would be more money. Prior to accelerating productive operation, the supervisor inspected the machinery. We can say it better as before speeding up production, the supervisor inspected the machinery. As a simple rule of thumb, it is always better to use words that are more frequently used in the language, hence are more familiar with the larger part of the audience, so that your message goes across much more easily and in a much more effective manner than it would otherwise. The concept of familiarity also applies when we use acronyms or abbreviations in our writing or speaking. Number one, we should always use only very familiar acronyms which everybody knows about. For example, if you use WhatsApp abbreviations like TTYL or BRB, which many people may not understand, that is not a very good idea. So use number one, acronyms or abbreviations that are universally known. Even there, when you write those or speak those, introduce the acronyms the first time you use them by defining them in full. For example, if you are writing a report on health and you have to write the World Health Organization, WHO, you write World Health Organization and in brackets you write WHO, and then in your article or write up further, you can only write WHO. So the audience is familiar with the acronym that you're using. Number two, restrict the number of acronyms in individual sentences. Do not use too many acronyms because that will again break the chain of understanding of your audience. When writing for non-expert readers, try to avoid one, acronyms that they may not understand, two, too many acronyms in the same sentence. So if you're writing for people who are working in the medical field, if you write, let's say, CT or CMT scan, that might be alright. If it's a non-expert audience, do not again write too many acronyms from that field. Do not use SMS or WhatsApp abbreviations in formal or semi-formal writing. As we just discussed, WhatsApp abbreviations like BRB or TTYL or ROFL are not universally accepted language. So another aspect of familiarity is the use of foreign words or foreign phrases. There are too many foreign words or phrases in the English language that we often use. However, we must understand that we must use foreign words or phrases only when we are very sure that our audience understands them really well. For example, if you use the phrases bona fide or status quo or prima facie, there are simpler meanings that you can insert instead of these phrases. So if you feel your audience is not familiar with these phrases, please do not use them. In a similar vein, we should also avoid the excessive use of jargon. Jargon is the technical language used in any field. For example, whether you are in the field of science versus in accounts, it is better to avoid the use of jargon and use plain English words, especially when you're talking to lay people who may not be able to understand the jargon in that given field. For example, if you're in accounting and you use the word annual premium, saying payment might be better. Simple words, as we discussed earlier, are similar to familiar words. They give a clear meaning to the audience and do not mislead. It is always better to use a simpler substitute of a word than a more complex one, especially when you're speaking. Because while you're speaking, your audience or your listener cannot go back to the dictionary in the middle of your speech to look up the meanings of those words. I've listed some words on this slide that are not so simple. Try and find out simpler substitutes or synonyms for these words. Concise words or phrases are both concrete and precise, and hence they convey the meaning more crisply and clearly. For example, if you call somebody an industrial worker, it is better to specify that they are a welder or a foreman. If you say furniture, it's better to say what furniture are you talking about. Is it a chair or a table? Because that is more concrete and gives a better visualization. Saying apparel or a piece of apparel is again ambiguous. What piece of apparel is it? Is it a shirt or a trouser? Will make things more clear. Saying a good attendance record is again ambiguous because good is an ambiguous word. Instead of that, say either 100% attendance or 80% or whatever figure there is to make things more clear. Similarly, saying that Reliance is the leading company in India in telecom may not give very specific, concise information. Saying that it is amongst the top 10 in telecom is a better idea. Similarly, saying that this will happen in the near future would leave a scope for ambiguity. Saying that this will happen by Thursday noon or it should happen by this time is always a better idea. Another way of word usage that makes our language more concise is avoiding redundancy. Redundancy is that part of the message that can be eliminated without any loss of meaning or information. So wherever we use many words and all those words are not required, even deleting some of those words might still convey the same message. It is of course better to delete those words that don't convey any extra message. For example, basic fundamentals is a phrase that is wrong simply because fundamentals are always basic. We sometimes say this is adequately enough, but that is flawed because either something is adequate or it is enough. Very often people mistakenly write this phrase called future prospects. For example, they ask what are the future prospects of a BTech in computer science. Now guys, future prospects, as commonly as it might be in use, especially in India, is a phrase that is flawed because prospects are always in the future. So even you have to ask what is the future of this branch, or you ask what are the prospects of this branch. Sometimes people say let's resume again, which is wrong. Either you resume or you begin again. Very often people write for mails, please revert back by this time, which is again flawed, as many of us already know. Either you revert to a mail or you reply to a mail. Revert back is 2 words. Back is totally not required here. If you say the month of May, I went to America in the month of May, the month of is not required. May is a month, that's obvious. Similarly with true fact and new innovations, there are no old innovations. The last parameter with respect to word usage is using unbiased words. Now bias is something that can creep into our language either knowingly or unknowingly. However, it is extremely essential that we remove our bias and have language that is totally unbiased. To begin with, let's think of gender bias. We very commonly use the pronoun he for both the genders just because we are accustomed to using that. For example, if you have to say a good student must be this, and we always say he should be this, he should be that, which is in a way a vestige of our past. We have been living in a patriarchal society for a long time, and we generally use the male pronoun for both genders, which is not correct. So nowadays there is this move towards language that is largely unbiased, and people can use either he slash she or s slash he or generally they sometimes to refer to both the genders, which is much better. Also, any uncalled for references to race, religion, caste are never appreciated. Similarly, a reference to disability where it is not required should never be made. For example, saying Rajesh, who is physically handicapped, is a great employee is never a good idea. We can just say Rajesh is a great employee. You might also remember from our discussion on disability in the 7 C's of communication that certain words are seen as proper and alright to be used for disabled people, while certain words are seen as unacceptable. For example, calling somebody physically disabled is better than calling them crippled, while calling somebody psychiatrically disabled is better than calling them mental or crazy. Just like other biases, age bias is also not a very good idea. So specifying somebody's age along with the message when it is not required is never good. For example, if you say that this young employee is creating nuisance at work, it might imply that this employee is creating nuisance because he is young. Or saying that this old employee is not efficient enough is also not correct because you are referring to their age, and it seems to imply that this fellow is not working properly or is inefficient because he is old, which again points to the idea that probably every old person would be inefficient, which may not be the case. Lastly, a final thought on the choice of words. 1. Restrict your use of negative words. Instead of saying the restaurant will not be open for lunch this Saturday, it's better to say the restaurant will be closed for lunch this Saturday. Not is the negative word and should not be used if possible. In a similar vein, instead of saying I have not received the documents that you have sent me, it is better to say I have yet to receive the documents that you have sent me, connoting more positiveness. The second point is to use the right set of words that convey meaning in a more positive manner. For example, instead of saying this kind of callous and indifferent behavior is not expected, We can say the company expects better conduct and more commitment from the employees. Being positive, therefore, is a very important value, not just in life, but also in writing. On that note, let us close our topic on word selection, and we next move to framing the correct sentences.